Okay, so before I can begin this episode of the Muppet Vlogs, I just want to quickly mention that during the time that I've made this episode, it has only been a few weeks since the passing of Carrie Fisher, which, as we all know, played the role of Princess Leia in the original trilogy, along with The Force Awakens and Episode 8, which, by the way, also during the time that I made this episode of the Muppet Vlogs, we only know that movie as just Episode 8. But I also would like to mention that just a few months before this, it was actually the passing of Kenny Baker, who actually played R2-D2. So this episode of the Muppet Vlog in particular is a little bit of a dedication to those two figures, highly important figures of Star Wars, even though, it's only one of them. Kenny Baker technically did appear in this episode of The Muppet Show. This is still in honor of both of them. Also, I have to mention that this is in honor of both of them because I would probably get a lot of crap if I didn't say anything about it. Hey guys, this is Animat, and welcome back to the Muppet Vlog, and this time we got a really special episode for you guys, which is the 17th episode of Season 4 of The Muppet Show, which features the cast of Star Wars. Okay, well, it's not the entire cast, it's only some of them, where you got Luke Skywalker, C-3PO, Chewbacca, and R2-D2, which, of course, they are played by Anthony Daniels, Peter Mayhew, and Kenny Baker. But the main one in particular for this episode is actually Mark Hamill, who began his career as an actor and really, his career just immediately jump-started into massive popularity when he played the role of Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars trilogy, from A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and also Return of the Jedi. Now, he has been an actor a little bit afterwards, where he decided to jump from role to role, but he decided, instead of desperately trying to find another big hit where he would be, playing a role that would be equally as popular as Luke Skywalker, he decided to go into voice acting, where he actually has, currently right now even, a highly successful career and a very prolific voice actor, in which his most popular role is actually the Joker in many different animated and even video game incarnations of Batman. And believe it or not, many people would even debate and argue that Mark Hamill's Joker is actually the best portrayal of the character, more so than Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, Jared Leto, and what have you. This guy is definitely top notch. Now, going into the episode of The Muppet Show that the Star Wars cast decided to join in, which, by the way, I just want to mention quickly, something that is actually really cool, and I wish people are still, I wish that people can still try to do with this episode, is that there was at one point when they wanted to try to make this episode in particular be officially canon in the Star Wars universe. That still needs to happen. But anyways, going back to what I was talking about with the Star Wars episode of The Muppets. Now, it's exactly like the Sylvester Stallone episode, where this was actually released right when Star Wars was massively popular, and just right around the corner would be Empire Strikes Back. So this was still, this was back in the time when Star Wars was really, really fresh. And on top of that, it does make sense how they actually managed to get a lot of the characters and the cast of Star Wars onto this, considering that Jim Henson and the company would later go and work onto the Star Wars movies, where they would help out bring Yoda to life. But okay, all trivia facts aside, going specifically into this episode in particular, I'm honestly actually really surprised by how corny this episode is. And when I mean corny, I don't mean by just Star Wars standards. This is even really corny by Muppet standards as well. The previous episodes, they didn't go, really cheesy or really corny as this. Maybe they have, but, this really brings it to a whole new level. which I guess it's really surprising considering that you expect maybe a bit more of a serious or maybe a smarter, well, no, not smarter wouldn't be the right word. I mean like a wittier tone per se. But here's basically the main thing with it. Now, there are a lot of elements that really are enjoyable in this episode. Like, it definitely makes it worth it. Let me just start off with the elements that the Star Wars cast didn't necessarily appear. There was like a few Muppet news flashes that are actually really funny. The opening number of Ramalama Ding Dong with the sheep is actually really well made. It was really nice. But another one that is probably a massive highlight of this episode that doesn't involve any of the Star Wars characters is actually Scooter when he would sing Six String Orchestra. On a technical level, it's actually really impressive with all the different sets that they made, all the different effects when they would bring in, like, they would bring in Zoot, they would bring in Floyd, they would bring in Janice, and then they would bring in Animal. It's actually really cool. And even, like, the skits that would involve the Star Wars characters themselves, that was actually really fun to watch. Where, of course, like, it's mostly the grand finale, or, like, or I guess the third act was pretty much entirely devoted to Pigs in Space, where Luke, C-3PO, and R2-D2, they're pretty much searching for Chewbacca, and they decided to take the swine trek, and you pretty much get this entire crossover with the characters of Pigs in Space with the Star Wars characters all together. But on top of that, you do get a lot of other elements as well. Now, this is actually the episode which apparently made the premiere of Angus Mcgonagall. And for me, this is very satisfactory to actually see this character, because for a long time, I have seen posters, I have seen, like, different places where they got that weird purple Scottish Muppet, and I had no freaking idea who the fridge this guy is. Like, I keep seeing this guy popping up. Like, there's even a poster on top of me where, like, I could see the main characters like Kermit, Miss Piggy, Fozzie, Statler and Waldorf, Scooter, and, like, I can recognize even some of the obscure ones there, but it's always that freaking Scottish dude with his tongue sticking out that his name always escapes me. But at least now I got my answer, which is Angus Mcgonagall, whose act is pretty much to gargle, and, like, he does have a little bit of a temper. So at least that answers that question right there. But one actually surprising element that I have to say, if I can go back to the little Pigs in Space bit, which definitely was great in itself, but it was actually a lot of fun to see the characters sing and dance as well, because you actually do have a little bit of a moment where Chewbacca and R2-D2 do a tiny little duet dance, and then, like, you suddenly have C-3PO doing a tap dance, which that was actually surprisingly really good and really fun to watch. On top of also Mark Hamill coming in, doing a little performance where all the characters would make a grand finale and sing When You Wish Upon a Star, which I don't know if I would say it's a massive coincidence or if it's ironic per se, where you got the Muppets with some of the cast of Star Wars singing When You Wish Upon a Star, which is a Disney song. And then later on in the future, all these three different elements would pretty much all combine together. Like, they're all a part of this one big family. So it's kind of weird how life works like that, you know? No, but it was definitely a lot of fun to watch. But if I may put in one little piece of criticism outside of the corniness of this episode in particular, I would have to say that this episode in particular doesn't really have a focus in terms of a story that it wants to talk about. Now, the thing is that it goes into several different directions, and it feels like it has several different stories that they don't necessarily connect well together, or they would end up dropping one another, and, like, it ends up being a little bit confusing, because there are three different stories happening at the same time. You got Luke Skywalker, C-3PO, and R2-D2 coming into the Muppet Show, where they are looking for Chewbacca. And then there is another one where Luke Skywalker would often be mistaken for Mark Hamill, which apparently is Luke's cousin. And often they would go and make a quick switch where it was Luke, and then suddenly now we see it's Mark Hamill, which also involves some really cool effects at the same time. So that was a lot of fun. But then there's also the plot with Angus Mcgonagall, where Angus has been replaced as a special guest star by the Star Wars crew. So he isn't necessarily having it, and he still wants to perform in the show. And what ends up happening is that there are some parts, like, they do end up dropping it. Like, the Angus Mcgonagall bit, like, was quickly scrapped off, and he ends up being a part of the Star Wars story now. And then, like, the element with searching for Chewbacca, that is actually quickly dropped because maybe it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but when they're in the planet Kuzbane, like, the way that they find Chewbacca is that Luke kind of introduces him as a secret weapon in a sense. It's like, we have a secret weapon, and who's that? It's Chewbacca! And then suddenly Chewbacca appears. It's like, weren't you looking for him or something like that? But yeah. So that's mostly my one criticism, is that as a story, it doesn't necessarily work out because they're trying to do several things, and, well, they didn't even try to really mesh them together to make this one grand story for this episode. So overall, I would say that with this episode of The Muppet Show, imagine if you take the Star Wars Holiday Special and it's actually good. Now, there's still that extreme sense of corniness. You still get the elements of a variety show, considering that it still is The Muppet Show. But it actually is very entertaining. It's still a lot of fun to watch, you know? It's still great to see a lot of these characters interact with each other, where you see C-3PO, R2-D2, and Luke Skywalker just hanging out and talking with the Muppets, with Kermit, Miss Piggy, and Fozzie. You do get, like, that whole collaboration thing going on, and it actually does work out well, on top of many different skits and musical numbers that don't necessarily connect with the whole Star Wars thing, but they still work out well. So, absolutely, if you guys are a Star Wars fan, then this is definitely a must-watch for you guys. For me, personally, I wouldn't say that this is one of the best episodes of The Muppet Show I've seen. Like, even though I can imagine a lot of people would come in to something like this, where the Muppets would bring in the cast of Star Wars and they would put in major hype. So, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best episode of The Muppet Show, but it's still entertaining. It's still great to watch these iconic characters come together, and they would literally put in a nice little song and dance number. So overall, like, yes, it's really, really corny, but it's still a lot of fun to watch. But anyways, that is pretty much it for this episode of the Muppet Vlog, so I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see if there are going to be more star-studded, literal or metaphorical, cast or whatever, or I don't even know where I was going with that whole metaphorical thing. I don't even know what the fridge. But anyways, you know what? Let's tune in next time to see how things are going to go in the next episode. So until next time, see you later, dudes!